Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have yet another guest. This is Zach from the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston.
Too.
Uh, Care to give us I'm told that I have hundreds of new viewers. Care to give those people a quick thumbnail of what the Brattle is?
Amazing. Yeah. Well, the Brattle Bookshop is a used and antiquarian bookshop in downtown Boston, right off of the Common, um, where we're one of the last few shops in the country, in the world, that sells a good stock of just general used books, and also rare and antiquarian books. And we have those in our three-floor shop, and we also have our sale lot of a randomly assembled miscellany of books, where you'll often see Steve outdoors, picking through the stacks and chatting up anyone too feeble to run away.
I always want to say that that's hyperbole, but the last three people who have come to the Brattle have actually found me out in the sale lot without
That's
planning it. They just walked up and there I was.
and I'm on site at the shop, and I'm down in the basement where it's, as you can imagine, filled with books. This is a little research nook. We're going through stock at the moment because we have an antiquarian book fair in Boston coming up in, starting 2 weeks from this afternoon. So a lot of what I've been doing is preparing our newest and best rare stock for that.
Which is the thing that people who just walk in the door of the Brattle might overlook, which is that you are a working antiquarian bookshop in addition to being everything else.
Yes, well, you can the shop. It exists on many levels, figuratively and literally. So you can walk into the shop if you're coming from the Boston Common side of West Street. You may not see our sale lot, and you might walk in and just see the first couple floors of really good used books on various subjects. If you never walk up to the third floor where we have our rare books, you wouldn't necessarily know they're there, but they certainly are.
Now that's
Even
just,
Steve
isn't it?
goes up there
The,
occasionally.
the, the stairs to the second floor are visible.
That's right.
The stairs to the third floor, you have to know what you're looking for, or you won't see them.
Or get lost in the classics.
Whoever goes to that aisle, yeah, probably. I mean, it sounds so horrifying. Next thing you're going to tell me you're around the corner and you're face to face with Shakespeare. Who would want anything like that? But if you come from the other end, if you come from the street, you will
Yes,
see the sale lot, which is huge and totally random and dirt cheap.
which is huge. And you
You have
might
all
not.
roads. You can go to the Brattle and spend $20 on 20 books.
Yes.
You can go inside the shop and spend $20 on 2 books, or you can go upstairs.
And you can buy a $20,000 book.
Hmm. Uh, and I love the Brattle, of course. I've mentioned it many times. I've been going there for well over a year. I think I've got the lay of the land. I
How,
think
how many how many times have you done that year, Steve?
uh, and a subject has come up. There's a painful part of the Brattle, uh, which is that in the aforementioned sale lot,
Mhm.
the books are $5, $3, and $1, and they recede in price as they recede from the street. But they're not receding to a farm upstate where they will be cared for by a kindly couple. They're receding to a dumpster where they will be thrown away.
That's
The
right.
books that
That
don't
does
sell at
happen
$5, they
with.
don't sell at $3, and they don't sell at $1. They're going to be thrown away. They're going to be lower than one.
That's right.
Anybody can afford a
That's
dollar.
right.
So there's a chance
Yeah,
that you will go to the sale lot and see someone throwing away books.
it is a common occurrence. I don't know if anybody feels great about it, but I
Nobody
also
feels great
wouldn't
about it.
say that too many of us are morally conflicted about it either.
Nope, not even me. And I hate
Yeah.
the sound of those books thumping into that dumpster, but if you can't sell at $5, $3, and then $1 for people who, let's face it, just like me, are going multiple times, if you can't do that, then I mean, it's pitiless, but
Yeah,
nevertheless.
that's right.
Uh, but
Oh, no, never mind. Okay.
as those books are getting handled and getting put back in the wrong places and being shoved into spaces and being left out maybe in a quick shower or whatnot. As
Hmm.
they're getting closer and closer to the dumpster, they're getting in worse and worse shape. They're deteriorating. I've seen it
Usually,
happen where a book that is put out on the $5 cards that I'm thinking, I might want that. But if I wait, it's going to fall apart because its dust jacket is the old paper kind.
yes.
Two people handling that is going to rip it to shreds. So if I want it intact, I should get it now.
That's
Uh,
right. And oftentimes, if the condition deteriorates before sort of its a book's time interval at a particular price point expires, we might hasten that process.
and I would
Which
assume, I would assume that books being out in the sale lot at all is also a function of you determining their shape, the shape they're in.
that oftentimes, I'd say more often than not, that is the determining factor of what goes out there, um, as opposed to staying in stock inside the shop. Condition and far more often than content or edition, things like that, which also are part of the calculus, but not necessarily decisive.
Which brings us,
Condition is usually decisive if
that
it
brings
fails
us
to reach a
a
certain
nice smooth
threshold.
segue to today's subject, which is the condition of books.
Yeah.
How to keep your books in good condition. You must encounter this a million times. It's not just the sale lot. You go out to buys where you
Oh,
must see books in all kinds of shape.
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I would assume that for a secondhand bookseller, the number one thing before anything else is don't pull your book off the shelf like this. don't reach up and pull it off like
I,
that. The
I
shelf.
have a perfect object lesson in that. This is a first edition of Harvey Cushing's Life of Dr. Osler. And you can see the top right there. That is a direct result of somebody reaching for it on the shelf, pulling it down, and pulling that spine and having it crack.
That must
So
happen 100 times a day at the shop.
yeah, I mean it does. It probably does.
Would
It
you
probably
care to
does.
just quickly tell people the right way?
Sure. The easiest there are a couple good ways. One, which will always work, is instead of grabbing on sort of the cloth of the binding, if you just put your hand on the text block, the top edge here, and sort of pull on that, you can usually pull the book out enough where you can grab it by the spine. That's perfectly safe. The other thing you can do is just push in the books that are on either side of that book, and then again, you can grab it by the spine, pull it off the shelf. Either one works. It takes slightly more effort, which I understand as humans we are reluctant to exert, but it is worth it. Um,
Well, as
it
Americans,
it is definitely a good
as
habit.
Americans, we're relucted to do that.
I
As
think I
we want to
no, I
use
mean I
French
think
fry to
I
pull it off the shelf. Get wedge this French fry in there and pull it off the shelf. But it goes on from there. Yes,
oh,
yes.
there are yeah.
What are
One
some of the basic 101 things that a person can do to care for their books? Should people rotate and dust their books periodically?
You can. I really don't. Occasionally I'll do it, but it's not terribly necessary
The shop,
unless you're
right?
what's that?
The shop doesn't do it. There's
No.
no
Oh,
point. You have turnover.
we have enough turnover. Occasionally, we'll go through certain areas that get less traffic and tidy them up a little. But for the most part, it's not something that we pay attention to. One thing that's really important at sort of a basic level, well, I'm looking sort of behind you, and I see all of your books on the shelf are are standing up with their spines out. And that's a perfectly good way to store the sort of standard hardcover novel size books that you mostly have back there. One thing that is important, though, when you start getting into larger format books, especially larger format art books or photography books that have sort of a thick text block, but are also on a really heavy stock paper. Those are a lot better to store flat on one of their covers. The problem being the weight of the actual paper of the book over time will sort of sink down and and put undue pressure on the binding.
I know the term. That's cocking.
But well, it can get cocking, but also what it really does is it can crack the hinges of the book that really in modern books are the only thing holding the text block, the paper of the book into the binding. Once those crack, you can have the book, come apart in two pieces. The
So
easiest way to avoid that is keep your books flat,
you're saying
especially the larger, heavier ones.
art books really do belong pretentiously displayed on coffee tables?
Well, you can have them in a pile too, but that is the safest way to store them. Absolutely.
That's I also I'll have you know that that sideways crack about common editions, all of these things we got at the Brattle. All of
That's
them.
right. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a crack. More that it's not as big an issue with sort of the standard size hardcover. It's really when you start getting into a larger format book, or if you start going earlier with a lot of particularly American 19th century books, where you have those nice publishers' cloth covers. Um, a good example is if you've ever seen the first edition of Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs. Those are two very large books, big, heavy text blocks. Um, and books like that, again, are almost a little too fat for their binding to sustain. Um, so those bindings do get weak over time if you stand them up straight, especially if you have particularly chunky books, um, which they liked to publish in the 19th century. And they didn't like to put them out in two volumes if they could avoid it, because that means less money.
I mean, what about the process of putting things in books? I mean, if you're a book historian, you must love that because of
Yes.
the stuff that you find in there, but it can't be good for the
Yep.
book.
Uh, well, it can well, it's never ideal, but there are better and worse ways to do it. And the really the thing you have to watch out for is, are you letting that book close on its own, or are you putting undue stress again on the hinges of the book? If you're, for instance, I'll get this again. This is a book that was printed in 1925. Um, you can see sort of the inner hinge right here. The upper and lower hinge, those are the weakest parts of the book, because those really are the only thing that's holding this whole block of paper into the binding. So if you do anything that prevents that from closing the way it wants to, like if you put a stack of newspaper clippings in here, over time, again, you're going to weaken that. You're going to crack that end paper that's holding it together. And then you're going to have a book whose binding falls off.
An endemic problem for
So,
me is the perfect size of American currency as a bookmark.
yeah. Well, something that thin, it is not going to be a problem. It
No,
becomes a problem again when the covers can't close naturally.
it
Because
becomes
when
a problem for me when I sell those books to the Brattle without checking.
yeah, right. Well, for instance, with books like you often sell back to us, you'll have the publicity flyers, and you'll have a folded publicity letter, a press release in with your review copies. So you'll kind of have those stuffed in there, and that will over time wear away uh, the structural integrity of the book.
But so often, thanks to that dumpster, those books don't get a whole lot of time. It's just a little while.
They move pretty well. they move pretty well, I think.
So what about the much vexed subject of covering your books?
Hmm.
What
Um,
about that? All sorts of plastic covers, Mylar covers available online.
yeah, and they're mostly good. The ones we use at the shop, I'll grab one right here. These are sort of resized with a little flap. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, with a little flap where you can tuck the bottom of the dust jacket in. The thing I like about this style is there's no piece of white paper backing the the cover, which you'll see in a lot of versions of these, where you tuck the dust jacket in between a piece of paper and the actual Mylar.
Yeah.
Um, I I caution people against using those, and usually if we buy books that have those, we'll take those off. Because again, and with all of these things, whether we're talking about wear to hinges, and especially problems with dust jackets, we're talking on a long timeline. We're not talking about something that's going to happen in a few weeks or a few months. We're talking on over years and years. Um, but what can often happen if you're using the kind where you put the dust jacket between the paper and the plastic is the dust jacket will develop kind of a wave to it, so it won't be flat anymore. And once that happens, you can just never get it out. This is mostly a problem not with paper dust jackets, but with the more modern kind of plasticized jackets. Those will develop a wave pretty quickly. Um, so I avoid the paper backed ones. The one thing I don't like about the ones that we have, and it's hard to find any others that aren't sort of pre-sized, which we use. You can see this little tab right here. This has an adhesive in the back that allows, for instance, if you're putting a cover on a dust jacket for a book at a public library, at a lending library, they oftentimes want to use that adhesive to stick to the dust jacket so it doesn't fall off as different people are checking out the book. It makes sense with that, but if you have a book for a collection and you want to keep it in the condition that it starts in, you don't want anything adhesive near any part of that book. Um, so I
So
usually just,
no
if I'm
packing
using
tape.
it, I'll clip that right out.
You don't want packing tape.
What's that?
You don't want to use
No,
pack.
no patent, Dave. No, don't do the Steve. Well, although with you're giving yourself a little bit of a hard time, but with paperbacks and things like that, go after. If it's a book to read, um, you know, put duct tape on it to protect it.
Now the plasticized covers that you talked about for modern paperbacks. I don't know if I have an example right to hand. Is there a reason to cover those,
The
or
paperbacks,
no hardcovers? The hardcovers,
hardcovers,
the finished plastic coverings that they use now. Publishers don't use paper dust jackets anymore.
right? Yeah, there is because it'll keep them clean. Um, I mean, this is more of a aesthetic thing, but it makes them look good on the shelf. It really pops. But it also protects, for instance, if you have your book on the shelf and you pull the dust jacket here, if it has that Mylar protector, it's probably going to be okay. If it just has, the dust jacket, you could damage it. So it's just another layer of protection. I think it's worthwhile.
And the book was to the success of our hopeless causes, which I really
Yes, which which I
like.
was talking
Dissident
to you
movements.
about because I
That's
thought it
alley.
was what's that?
Right up your alley.
I thought, and I not just the subject matter right up my alley. It's a newly published book. Who I think Princeton published it. If I'm not wrong, yes, Princeton published it. It's a new history of the Soviet dissident movement um, in sort of the post-Stalin era through the end of the Cold War. And I thought it was a really excellent treatment of the subject, and it's one I'm interested in anyway. I would have read it if it hadn't been good.
And how much of the literature, the novels, for instance, of those dissident movements ever crosses the doorway of the Brattle? How much of that do you ever see?
Well, a good amount, especially being in a place like Boston where you have a, a pretty large uh, native Russian and Russian speaking population. Um, you see a fair amount of them, both in translation and in Russian.
And would that be a case where that kind of literature, would that be a case where your knowledge of the ins and outs of its provenance would be the deciding factor? I mean, could a lot of those books go to an ordinary book dealer and they just wouldn't know what they're looking at? Wouldn't know that it was valuable?
Possibly. Most of the books from that time period, most of the novels from particularly the 70s and the 80s by Russian writers that were being published in English, they tended to be published in pretty large editions by the time they were translated
But
into
what about the ones
English.
who
The
weren't?
original, what's that?
What about the ones who were bucking the system and writing fiction in Russian?
Well,
Weren't getting
those
Random House deals.
Hey, could I have a handle?
no, and those were primarily published somewhere in Europe, or if they were published or published in the States, but in Russian. Or at least the first appearances of them.
And when you take literature like that, especially the subfuss kind, not the big names, but the writers who are, these hangdog writers who are living in Soviet Russia, maybe they've been threatened a number of times. They still can't help it. They can't help writing. They can't stop writing. When you get collectible items from that world, is there ever any collector interest from Russia?
Not as much. But again, it's not something that we have much experience with because a lot of that stuff we sort of sell in the shop or directly to a customer that's interested rather than cataloging something and putting it online, which is how someone in that market would see it. But so I guess I don't have a great feel for it, but my sense is a lot of that market is for people who are interested in Russian literature who are currently outside of Russia for one reason or another. It's anecdotal, but that's the sense I get.
And when it comes, one more question about taking care of your books. As physical objects, I presume as taking care of them with an eye towards resale value, either from you or from your heirs.
Or resale value or just preservation. If you have something that's nice, whatever happens to it after you have it, it's nice to, keep it in as good condition, as good a state as you can. It's kind of a I don't know, a Boy Scout perspective. Leave your campsite better than you found it. But I think there's something just intrinsically positive about that attitude.
So in the light of that attitude, where would we stand on annotating books?
Well, it's unless you are a prominent or famous person, I guess I should add that caveat. You are probably hurting the value of your book if you annotate it. So if you have a rare book, you probably don't want to write in it. That being said, if it's your book, you can do what you want with it. What I do personally, even with nonfiction books that I have that I just want to read, I'll write on note cards and just sort of stick them in the pages every once in a while.
So you don't write inside a book?
No, I don't. I don't like doing that. Because eventually a lot of books like that I want to write in. I'm obviously engaging with it probably for the information, which means once I have the information, I might not keep it. So I, probably want to resell it for as much as I can get, as opposed to my collected books, which I have a few of, which I just wouldn't write in.
So along that philosophy, it would probably be a bad idea to bring up someone who annotates library books. That would probably be a bad idea to do.
Don't No, you can't do that,
So,
Steve.
right. Surely no one
You can't do
annotates
that.
library books. They're right. Surely
No, don't do that.
no
That's
one does.
you can't. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Don't do
but
it.
but I want to circle back to something that isn't necessarily about book preservation, although I guess on one level it is. Well, you mentioned a book fair,
Yeah.
an
Book fair.
antiquarian
Yeah,
book fair. This
that's
is
right.
every year in Boston, and when the Brattle brings a book
Ev-
fair, the Brattle is going to be dealing with other antiquarian booksellers. The impression
yeah,
you've given me
over I
for
think
years is that it's mostly antiquarian booksellers selling to each other at the book fair.
a lot of the beginning of the fair is that because it's a lot of dealers from overseas and dealers from different parts of the country who and this is sort of a key part of it, who have different specialties, so are looking for books for a particular customer or for a particular kind of customer. And the way they replenish their stock is buying, or a big way that they replenish their stock is buying from other dealers. So that's a big part of the business at the fair, at least in the beginning of it. And then it's a retail fair, but part of the rare book business is absolutely selling between different booksellers.
And will those booksellers have some sort of uh, preliminary feel of what maybe a colleague from Zurich or China is going to bring?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, for
That's
instance,
certainly
I don't know about if the Brattle does this, but would a shop like the Brattle go with a shopping list in mind?
we don't tend to buy too much because we don't have a specialty. We sort of specialize in not specializing. So we bring books on all subjects. Um, Whereas a lot of the book dealers, or I'd say a majority of the book dealers who are at these shows, tend to have specific areas that they curate for customers. Whereas they can usually absorb the cost of an item that we have at retail and then resell it.
And you mentioned retail here. You mentioned
Yeah.
that flurry of interdealer buying is at the
Mhm.
beginning,
At the
but
beginning.
the book fair is a retail event.
Absolutely.
How
It's a,
much
it's a,
of that is there? And you've been going to this book fair forever, right?
yeah. Yep.
Is it your experience that just an ordinary person can come in with $600 to spend?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Ordinary people come in with that and much larger amounts and much smaller amounts and can still leave with something fun. We make a point of bringing a lot of stock in, certainly under $100, usually under $50, um, to sort of engage with beginning collectors or people who this is the first time they've been at anything like an antiquarian book fair and see something that's fun and want to bring it home.
Are there dealers who have the opposite approach? They bring the 5 ticket items, the
Yes,
figures,
absolutely.
and
There
nothing
are
else.
there are certainly booths you can walk in and you won't see anything under $1,000 or even a higher price point.
Now you
Uh,
mentioned that
but that's not the majority by any stretch.
you said that you have a small collection of books that are collectible items that you have
Yes.
collected.
Mhm.
Are you a shopper at these events?
I'll usually
Or
find
I would imagine that you would rely on the serendipity of the shop. You're one of the only book collectors who will the books will literally come to you.
I do for the most part, but I also usually at a fair like this, I'll find one or two things that I want to buy.
And
And
are those things always crappy authors, or do you ever vary? just for the sake of
I don't think I've ever bought a crappy author, Steve. I don't know what you're talking about. For instance, at the book fair a couple of years ago, I saw a fantastic item. It was a hardware catalog, big, giant hardware catalog from the 1930s, from a hardware store in Indianapolis that just happened to be the Vonnegut hardware store, and was Kurt Vonnegut's family store. They had a big hardware store in Indianapolis, and I bought that catalog to go in my Kurt Vonnegut collection.
So they should finally have a piece of marginally good writing with the name Vonnegut on it. Great. Every collection needs one of those. Wood chipper advertisements and blurbs for women's corsets stuck to the pages at random. Better than anything Vonnegut wrote.
That is an opinion. And I think the internet is the place for it.
What about, as long as we're on the subject of the dude bro lit that you love so much, that makes you more popular on my own channel than it makes me, what about the dude bro gods? What's the likelihood that there'll be a collectible Cormac McCarthy?
There'll be,
at this book
there
fair?
will, if you can find us, I guarantee you, if you come to this book fair looking for Cormac McCarthy, you will not be disappointed.
And what would something like that be? It would a first edition of his crappy Pulitzer Prize winning pile of garbage, The Road. Would that be anything, or is that an ordinary thing for Cormac McCarthy?
That's a fairly ordinary book. It's I was going to say if it were a signed copy, it would be valuable. But to the best of my knowledge, he didn't sign any of those. The only ones he signed were for his son, who he dedicated. So that's a bad example to find a signed one, but you'll be able to find lots of signed.
He dedicated the book to his son?
Indeed, he did.
Mm-hmm. So he knows his son's name. Oh, okay. So fathers tend to know the names of their sons and maybe use the name. Okay.
That has been my experience.
Yeah, it's been, I think, the experience of everyone in the history of the world, but not in The Road. No, not in The Road. No.
So, well, for instance, The Road, I'm sure, is one of his more accessible, more obtainable books.
So what, in terms of those, everybody over the course of years, everybody has commented on Zach as a diehard baseball fan, and here he's got a baseball in his hand.
Well, Steve,
you'll be happy or maybe alarmed to know that you are only the second person I've ever known who was more comfortable talking with a baseball in his hand than talking without one.
It's very true, and also
Jay Gould.
My beloved New York Yankees are in the World Series for the first time since 2009, Steve, 15 years ago. Now, I was probably right here in this exact spot in 2009, but it was still a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to think that evil has been triumphant that long. But you never know. Maybe someone has buried a sprig of garlic at home plate. You can never tell. But you to move away from your horrible taste in sports teams and back to your horrible taste in books. You said that Cormac McCarthy's Pulitzer Prize winning pile of crap novel, The Road, would be an ordinary collectible for him. So what would be a non-ordinary collectible?
Well, certainly one of his, well, I should say a really nice copy of his first book, The Orchard Keeper, which I think was published in 1965. With Cormac McCarthy, there's sort of a dividing line in with his published books. Up until Blood Meridian, well, up through Blood Meridian, which was 1985, he was published by Random House. And they didn't consider him a very big writer. They did not put much publicity behind his books. So they didn't tend to come out in great numbers. A lot of the first editions are actually, you can find with remainder marks on the bottom edge. So those are a lot more difficult to obtain. than his novels after that, when Knopf signed him. And I think that was probably the All the Pretty Horses was his first book with them by the early 90s. So by then, he's published in much larger numbers. So those are much easier to get than the earlier ones.
Is there a chance that an earlier one will show up at the fair this year?
Oh, I'm sure there'll be lots of them. This is all relative. We're still talking about thousands of copies that were printed and published, just not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands.
I know you can't tell the future, and all of you should go if you're in the area, go to the Boston Book Fair. Hunt down the Brattle shop, hunt down their stall. But at this book fair, is there a chance that there will be a book at the book fair for which the only copy in the world is the one at the book fair?
There'll be numerous. There will be dozens, if not hundreds.
Oh my.
Yeah. Yeah, books like that, and usually that will be a bookseller will be eager to tell you that it is the only known copy, or at least the only recorded copy. Because certainly there are copies of books in private hands that have been in private hands, for their lifetimes. Oh yeah, that's rare is a word that gets thrown around, but at book fairs like this, there will be lots of actually rare books, not just highly collectible and expensive books.
Oh my!
Which oftentimes oftentimes rare gets used in that sense rather than its true sense.
One of a kind copies.
Yeah.
Wow.
And also, when you're talking about